Let me start this way. I want to acknowledge, maybe because, I knew it anyway, but driving up here from Austin and then driving around today in Dallas, the radio, of course, was full of references to the fact that it's Veterans Day. And I just want to acknowledge that since my father and my uncle were both veterans of World War II, and my uncle was killed in the Battle of the Bulge, and after having only been in combat for 3 weeks. And what makes that, in a sense, even more poignant was that both of them, they came to this country as small children, Swedish immigrants, and they both worked in the steel industry. So they were, I think, both because of their immigrant status and the work they were doing in the steel industry, they were exempt from the draft. They weren't drafted. But they both volunteered. First my uncle and then my father. And so a little tip of the hat or acknowledgement of their sacrifice, as well as that for for all the veterans out there and still there today. Let's be clear about something. I am not Santa Claus, although we do have a rather close relationship, and the closer it gets to Christmas, the relationship seems to get closer, and the lines of distinction between where Carl stops and Santa begins seem to blur. And tonight, we'll talk some about Santa's history, some about my history, and how the two have come together, and then also about the kids and what happens when they come to visit Santa. My first memories of, let me just say this by way of background. I've been portraying Santa now for 28 years. First 3 years were in Austin, and the next 3 years I was in Santa Monica Place, of all places, very appropriate. And then the last 22 years, 21, this will be the 22nd, I've been at North Park, which is a very unique opportunity I've had there to see a lot of kids grow up in my lap. And to the point where now I actually have young parents coming with little babies to see me who sat in my lap when they were little. And sometimes they even bring the pictures to prove it. So that's pretty neat. And sort of accomplishes what I think both North Park and I were hoping, which was that, and which what I think Santa in part represents, which is a very special tradition. And it's part of what he symbolizes, which is why that tradition, I think, has lasted over centuries now, and why it's so powerfully protected, especially when there's some sort of threat. Every year at Christmas, you'll hear stories of a school teacher or somebody who decided to tell a group of children the quote-unquote truth. And parents go crazy. And literally, sometimes those people have had to go into hiding for their own protection. And there's some very good reasons for that, and we'll get to that eventually. But backing up, my initial search for Santa began, like most of you, when I was young. I don't actually have although there are some pictures of it, I don't actually have vivid memories of sitting on Santa's knee, but I do remember going over to my Swedish grandparents' house on Christmas Eve. Being Swedish, they celebrated in the Swedish tradition where the presents were opened on Christmas Eve. And there'd be smorgasbord. We would have a good Swedish meal with my grandmother's famous Swedish pancakes. It would be years later before I realized that the only thing Swedish about them was the fact that she made them, as well as her Swedish meatballs, too. And we go to church, do the little candlelight service where you sing all the wonderful songs, and then we come home and it'd be time to open the presents. Now, it was mostly the grandparents, both sets of grandparents, and my parents, and myself, and my sister, who was 6 years younger. And we would pass out all the presents, and everybody would be opening theirs in turn. My sister and I obviously had the most, being the only kids there. And just about the time we were getting down to the last of the presents, my grandfather would excuse himself and go into the kitchen for a cup of coffee. And it never failed that within a minute or two, you'd hear sleigh bells. And we'd run to the door, hoping to get a glimpse of the reindeer, but never quite in time. When we opened the door, what we would find was a great big sack of presents just from Santa. And we'd grab the sack and be pulling it into the house just about the time my grandfather came back from the kitchen with his cup of coffee. And I was already old enough, being somewhat older than my sister, to kind of know what was going on. But I didn't let on because Santa brought me some pretty good stuff. And actually, when I did my dissertation, I discovered that there are a lot of children who make a decision to no longer believe in Santa, but don't necessarily let their parents in on it right away because Santa does bring some pretty good stuff. And they're afraid that if they do, the presents will stop. But I didn't have any intention, say in my teen years or my early 20s, of any fantasies or any particular draw to Santa. I liked watching the kids in the malls with Santa, but it was in the early 70s when I graduated high school, and I did what most young men did at the time. I let my hair grow long, and I grew a beard. And over the next decade, I started to put on a few more pounds, and by the time I reached 30, I started getting interesting glances from children in December, and it was highlighted for me one Christmas season. I was going to University of Texas, and I was crossing, those of you who know Austin, I was crossing Guadalupe, or the Drag as it's called, right in front of the university, and coming the other way, right on the other side of the crosswalk from me, were a group of preschoolers. Now, they were walking, as they often do, all in a line, all holding on to a rope. You've probably seen them with a teacher on one end and another teacher on the other end, and they're all, I don't know how they get them to do that, but they're all holding on to the rope. And so everything's going along fine till we are right in the middle of the street, and we're passing each other, and one of them looks up at me and yells, "Santa!" And the rope dropped. And now, instead of the rope, they were grabbing my legs and grabbing my arms, and we had a little conflagration right there in the middle of the street until the order of the rope was restored. But so I had it in my head, and I actually had some friends who started, kiddingly suggesting to me that I might want to look into portraying Santa, but I sort of just poo-pooed that. And then one year I saw an ad in Austin where they were obviously looking for someone who could portray Santa naturally, as they call it, utilizing your own beard and hair. And so I went to talk to them. That was for North Cross Mall in Austin, and that began, like I say, almost 30 years now of portraying Santa every Christmas. And Santa's been pretty good to me. He gave me a topic for my dissertation for my PhD in psychology. He helped contribute to the writing of a book, which I did get an email with questions about it. It is out of print. All I Want for Christmas is the title. It's a collection of children's letters to Santa and my comments about it. And it is out of print, has been for several years. Apparently, you can still sometimes find, copies rather inexpensively at Amazon.com or some of those kinds of places. The very first year, though, that I did Santa, portrayed Santa at North Cross Mall in Austin, the first child who sat in my lap was a little curly-headed 5-year-old boy. And he looked at me, and the first words I heard from a child as Santa was, "My daddy left us and moved to Waco. I guess he doesn't love us anymore." And I suddenly realized I was going to hear about a lot more than teddy bears and fire engines and Barbie dolls. So I went out and got one of these, a journal. And I've kept it with me. I've got almost 30 of them now. Kept it with me throughout the season. And whenever something like that would happen, I would write it down. And it worked wonderfully because while I was writing down whatever touching or thoughtful or hilarious comments that the kids were making, they, of course, knew I was writing down that they wanted a fighter jet X2 or, the G.I. Joe or Little Mermaid or what have you. And you might say, well, gosh, why wouldn't you remember something as significant as that? And the thing is, what I found was that the experience was so immediate and somewhat intense with each child's visit and wanting to give them my full attention. After 3 or 4 children, I will have forgotten whatever it was that they said that struck me so powerfully. So having the journal helped me keep track of those things. And I realized, too, that while the Barbie dolls and the teddy bears were very important, and what I heard the most of, especially from children at a young age, they were hoping for other things from Santa as well. That same year, first year, a little 3-year-old girl said to me that all she wanted for Christmas was to see Grandma. And I didn't think that was too unlikely. Families get together during Christmas. But as we talked some more, it turned out that Grandma had passed away that year. And suddenly we were talking not about teddy bears and Barbie dolls, but we were talking about how much she loved her grandmother and how much her grandmother loved her and how she was really missing her. And I somewhere, not consciously at all, thinking about it, because sometimes people say, well, what do you say when something like that happens? And what I do is I trust my gut, or my own inner Santa, as I've come to experience it. And it doesn't help to have a background in psychology, I guess, too. But what I suggested was that if she found herself really missing her grandmother, that if she had a favorite doll or teddy bear, that she could maybe talk to it the way she would like to talk to her grandmother. And if she listened, with her heart instead of her ears, she might even hear a reply. And mostly what it seemed like she did need, though, was just some validation that it was a hard time. And you know how those first holidays are after a loss of some kind or another. Now those experiences and that kind of hoping that Santa's going to be able to do something supernatural or magical, and sort of change reality, comes up every year. Unfortunately, I hear a lot of, they want mommy and daddy back together again, or mommy and daddy to quit fighting. I remember one little boy wanted a microphone. I asked him why, and he said, so mommy and daddy can hear me when they're fighting. Or they want somebody to get well who's sick. And when I don't know if something like that is possible, sometimes mom or somebody's there to give me an indication if it is or if it's not. If I don't know, I'll always make clear, Santa can't do that. It's not something I can do or promise. But what I can do is make that my wish for you as well. And sort of jumping the gun, I think it's that Santa serving as a symbol of hope, a hope for some kind of positive outcome, whether it's as simple as a teddy bear or a fire truck, or as colossal as peace on earth, is why he has remained such a powerful figure. And I think we should back up then and say, well, wait a minute. It's not just Santa. There have been midwinter gift bringer figures long before Santa. Most of us know about St. Nicholas, who's his most famous grandfather. But if you go back even before St. Nicholas and even before the birth of Christ, you find the solstice celebrations where people, particularly in Europe, would gather during the coldest, darkest time of the winter, and they would have a celebration, a feast, and they would make bonfires. And people would bring food, which they had little of at that time, and other goods, and they would share it with others. And they were doing so as a statement of their faith that the sun would return, the fields would grow again, and there would be enough for everyone. And so they could afford to share. So, believe it or not, the gift bringer figures at that time were the figures that figured into these celebrations were people like Thor and Odin, both of whom had long beards. And Thor was seen to ride in the sky in a chariot pulled by goats, which is not too far of a stretch from a sleigh drawn by reindeer. And then, of course, St. Nicholas came along, and you may know a lot of the stories related to him. He was supposedly born with his hands clasped together in prayer, and there are a lot of wonderful stories about St. Nicholas. And I think the one that most directly ties into some of our Christmas traditions has to do with his, he did love children. He actually was a child of a fairly wealthy couple who died while he was still young, and he went to live with a group of priests and monks who were bringing him up. But he still had access to his parents' wealth. And he heard of a family in town in which a merchant who was on hard times, and he had 3 daughters. And the only vocations that were available to them were to either get married or to be sold into slavery or prostitution. And it's just how things were in those days. And to get married, of course, they needed a dowry. And he didn't have it because of his financial hardships. And it was getting to the point where first one and then the other and then the third girl was going to have to be sold one way or another. Well, Nicholas had a kind heart, and he heard of their situation. So one night, on Christmas Eve of all nights, he snuck out of the monastery, and he grabbed a cloak. Legend says it was red. And he donned it so that no one, and pulled it over his head so no one would know who he was. And he made his way to the merchant's house. And at the time, it was the custom for the girls and women to hang their stockings over the fireplace so the fire would dry them after they'd been washed. Well, he didn't want to break into their home, so what he did was he took 3 sacks of gold and he threw them up so that they would come down the chimney, and legend has it that they each landed in each of the girls' stockings. So when they woke in the morning, each girl had their dowry, and in the form of the sacks of gold. And if you go to a pawnbroker these days, look over their door, there's usually a medallion of some form with the 3 sacks of gold, because Nicholas, in addition to being the patron saint of children, was also the patron saint of pawnbrokers and sailors and women who wanted to get pregnant, women who wanted to get married, and even, I believe, ladies of the evening. I didn't know they had a patron saint, but and the stories go on, most of them having to do with good works that Nicholas does in the care of children. And other orders of nuns, began adapting the practice of taking baskets of goods, food, and presents, leaving them at the doors of poor families, and you can see where it ends up leading. We could do a whole course on the evolution of that practice down to where we are today with Santa Claus, and the various different cultures have different gift bringer figures, and it's not always a big bearded guy. In Italy, it's La Bufina, who's the good witch, and Grandfather Frost in Russia. And there's different ones in different parts. In some countries in South America, it's actually supposedly the Christ child who brings the presents on Christmas Eve. So what's important there is, again, the retention of a loving figure, all loving, non-demanding. I mean, there's the stuff about being good, and in some cultures that played a bigger role, but we all know these days, and I always make it clear that Santa knows there's no such thing as a bad child. There are children who get tired, who get grumpy, don't want to cooperate, and there's plenty of adults who do the same. Santa knows that maybe instead of bad children, we should call them discouraged children when that happens. And that what's important is that they try, and that if they try to cooperate and try to do what's expected of them, then Santa and the elves and Mrs. Claus, the reindeer, will make sure that they get an acknowledgement of that, maybe more than a reward. But I still hear a lot of parents, and I try to dissuade them when I do, using Santa as sort of a little bit of reverse psychology, or sort of a threat. You know, if you don't do what I tell you, you know your Santa's not going to bring you anything for Christmas, And no. That's just putting the blame somewhere else. There's way more of this, of information than I can probably do in the time we have, especially to, oh my gosh, it's not 7:30, is it? We started late, keep going. We did? Okay, good. I'm going to assume that you're not lying to me, but so we're gonna go. Let's do this. Let's save some questions if you have them, about my dissertation research, which actually focused on what happens when children decide to no longer believe in Santa. And by the way, we all know that Santa is alive and well right now up at the North Pole, getting very busy for Christmas this year, along with the rest of the elves. And that there does come a time, though, when a lot of children decide to no longer believe. And then it's funny, because about the time they grow up enough to have kids of their own, they seem to start believing again, you know, and bringing their kids to see Santa. So, and that's certainly everybody's prerogative. It can be very overwhelming, though, when children come to visit Santa. Obviously, the environment is often loud, and sometimes you're waiting in line for a really long time, and there's a lot of pressure. You know, the parents want a really good picture, and they want you to look nice in your Christmas outfits and everything. And then there's the whole question of, have I been good, and is he going to find out that I haven't? And they get up there, and sometimes it gets just too much. And like the little boy who, when I asked him what he wanted, he put his hand to his head and said, "Wait a minute, I'm losing my mind." And he didn't mean he was going crazy. He meant his mind had actually gone somewhere, and he was trying to find it. And then another one who was very philosophical. And one of the great gifts I've gotten portraying Santa over the years is the wisdom that children possess and are willing to share, like this one. He says, I asked him what he wanted, and he says, "Oh, I don't have very much in mind. I don't know what I want, but that's okay, because I won't get upset if I don't get it." I think that's a pretty good way to live, actually, you know. And then sometimes they say things that Santa has to stop and think twice about. What do they want? Like the little girl who said, "I want a little chair with a little desk with a little diarrhea on it that I can write in." I was glad she added that part, you know. So anyway. And then it doesn't take, I mean, what they're asking for becomes more personal as they get older, but they can still be pretty young and come up with some very striking things. A little boy who was in first grade said, "This may sound a little strange, but I've been having a hard time at school, and I wanted you to bring me some friends." And then another one just looked at me, and I said, "What do you want?" He says, "Whatever is in Santa's heart for me." Yeah, and I'm sure that he was probably 5, because 5 is a great age, and it's where you're most likely to hear, you know, things like that, and things on the other end of the extreme too. Oh, and sometimes they combine what they're looking for. I'm sorry, what? Okay. Thought maybe he was looking for somebody. One little one said, "I want peace on earth and a cell phone." Great combination there, too. Now, the question of being good does come up, and as much as I say I try not to dwell on it, actually, if I don't ask about it, they feel like part of the conversation's been left out. And how am I going to know that they have been good if I haven't had a chance to hear about it? And then sometimes they get in a quandary because they know they haven't been perfect. But some make a pretty good attempt at it, like, "Well, I've been good for 1,000 years. I've been so good, I can't think of just one thing I did to be good." And then I said, "Were you good?" "Well, let's just say I've been better than last year." And then sometimes they just sort of give up. "Were you good?" "No." Sometimes, no. Sort of, no. Not really. I tried to clean up my room, but it never really worked out. I'm even grounded tonight. But he does get points for honesty. And some get a little mixed up on the notion of being good and what it means. This boy came over to my home and started hitting me. And what did you do? I can't tell you, but it was good. And then reality comes in again. Right now we're going through a divorce, and so we get a little mad now and then. And then the little 2-year-old came running up to me, when it was his turn. Just came running up and yelling the whole way. My mommy went all the way to New York City and she brought back a potty seat and I pooped in it. So I congratulated him. I said, good for you. And then he leaned forward and whispered, but I don't pee in it yet. I suggested he just keep trying. And then I often also ask, instead of, have you been good, I say, well, I know you've been good. Tell me something you did to be good. I keep my pants on. I don't hit, spit, kick, or plug things in. Sometimes you can tell what the issues have been at home. Have you been good? Well, I'm a normal 5-year-old boy. It just speaks volumes, doesn't it? Those of you who know 5-year-old boys. And again, on the other hand, just sort of takes your breath away. What did you do to be good? I tried to make friends with people who don't have any. And these are young children, 4, 5, 6. And by the way, I will say this. Sometimes you can tell Mom and Dad do use a visit to Santa as a teaching moment. And you can tell the difference when that sort of response is something they've been practicing with Mom and Dad to say, which is not bad because Mom and Dad don't want the kid to get tongue-tied and not know what to say. But sometimes the spontaneity of what they say surprises even Mom and Dad, like this one. What did you do to be good? I gave $50 to church to help buy toys for homeless children. I said, well, where did you get the money? Thinking it might have come from Mom and Dad. I saved it. It was all mine. And Mom nodded that was true. And again, 5 is a great age. What did you do to be good? My heart is very caring about everybody. And I bet it is. Okay. On the question of being good, sometimes they just can't resist tattling on someone else. Kyle Johnson, that little boy in my class? He hits me all the time, and he's mean, and he kicked me in the face, and the teacher can't stop him. So when a little boy named Kyle Johnson comes to see you, you know what to do. And, I could not write this, This is right out of their mouth, Sometimes one of the biggest gifts I'm given in this work come from the kids who express sentiments just like this. This little boy was about 9, and he was getting near the age where kids sometimes get a little antsy about coming to see Santa. And he says, I just wanted to tell you that you've been very good to me over the years, but this may be the last time I come to see you. And I thought, how sweet. And I did. It was very interesting. I saw him the next year. He was standing at the edge of the set just watching. He didn't want to come in anymore, but he did want to watch. So I went out and said hello to him. Okay, let's see. Oh, and like I say, sometimes they give me great gifts like this. Little girl was done with her visit, and she was just bubbling over. She was just so happy, and so she got off my knee and was going out the exit just as the next child was coming up. She just whirled around and yelled out real loud, "Santa, I love you like a pig loves corn." Now, let me hold on to that just in case. I'll do that. Now, they're not always just totally loving and appreciative. Sometimes they have a few complaints. The underwear I found in my stocking last year was not appreciated. I know you came last year. There was reindeer poop on the trampoline. My dad says we can't have a fire in the chimney or you'll burn your butt. And then one of my favorites, and of course it would happen in Texas, a little boy was sitting on my knee, and of course one of the things, I mentioned there are things, you talk about what they want, have they been good, and then the visit. Are they going to leave something out for me, or what about something for the reindeer? And usually it's cookies and milk. And chocolate chip, of course, is my favorite. But one little boy looked at me and he said, "I'm going to leave you Cheetos and a beer." And Dad was smiling really big at that point. Another one said, "I'm going to leave you Slim Fast." You know why. Don't make me tell you. Oh, I almost forgot. Yeah, we want to do this one too, and then I'll kind of lead towards some that will wind things up. The whole notion of hope related to Santa and the visit to Santa actually begins with the parents. When they bring their child for the first time, there's a very ritualistic characteristic to their visits. It's almost like their baptism or confirmation in some ways. It's sort of like a baptism into Christmas, if you will. And of course, they're hoping for just a perfect picture and a good experience. And more than that, what they're really hoping for is a good memory, a loving memory. It's a very special time, and sometimes the whole family's there accompanying the child. There was one young mother who brought up the baby very tentatively and sort of wanted to make sure that I knew how to hold a baby as if I hadn't held 800 already that season, and got him positioned just right, and so she backs up, and she and Dad are trying to get the baby to smile, and on each side of them are both sets of grandparents with the cameras and the video cameras taking pictures, as well as our photographer taking pictures. And then they pointed out that Uncle Harry and Aunt Sal were on the second floor taking the long-distance shots, And finally, after the photo session was done, Mom came to reclaim the little one, and she bent forward and she picked him up, and she said, kind of a little embarrassed now, she said, "He's our first." I looked at her and I said, "I know." And another time, and I've had this happen more than once now, extremely pregnant young mom climbed up on my knee, and as the photographer was taking our picture, she said, "This will be my baby's first picture with Santa." And actually then, it was about the middle of the season, she came back a week later, handed me her 4-day-old infant and said, "This will be my baby's second picture with Santa." And as they get older, the notion of what they ask for does deepen, and so does their compassion and their ability to care for others. One 9-year-old boy said, he says, I don't want any presents this year. I just want you to make my brother able to speak and talk like he used to before he had his stroke, and make it so he doesn't have to take pills all the time. And you get that kind of compassion and concern too. And another little one, only about 5, he says, Santa, I got plenty of toys. Why don't you take some of mine and give it to children who don't have as much? Mom started crying because it was totally unexpected. It was not at all rehearsed. It just came right out of his heart and his soul. Well, let me give you one or two to kind of finish, and then we'll leave time for questions, because we can get into some other things too. There's just so much when I start talking about this stuff. It's just I always think I'm going to have time to do all this, and then the time just disappears on me. Keep talking, he says. I had a couple of interesting experiences. I've been doing this long enough that another thing that Santa's given me, for one thing, he also introduced me to a career in storytelling, because right after the first year I realized I needed some way to interact with big groups of kids who didn't have time to, have everybody come up for a visit. And I hit upon the idea of reading stories. And the first year I had a great big storybook made, and I read Christmas stories to large groups of children. And then that eventually evolved into my telling stories to them. First the stories I've been reading, and then stories I started to make up or adapt from other fairy tales or folk tales. And then eventually I started telling stories as myself outside of the holiday season, and led me into a career path that I never would have thought of, into storytelling and theater. And another thing that Santa's done is sort of deepen my own sense of spirituality, or spirit, if you will. And there have been a couple of experiences that are just a little too powerful to be coincidence, I think, or synchronicity. I had one of the people I worked with, one of the last things we do at North Park on Christmas Eve is we usually finish up around 4 or so, and then before everybody goes home, we all get together, do a little present exchange of our own, and congratulate one another on a good season once again, and then we all hit the highway. And this year I had, and we have little presents for one another. A lot of times we don't take time to open them right then. And I gave a present to the woman who was a marketing manager that year. And so she didn't open it then. She took it on home. And she had a daughter who was about 7, who that year she'd lost her grandfather, the woman's father. And she had a specific, doll or something that she wanted. Well, Christmas Eve, later that evening came, and she told her mom that before she went to bed that she changed her mind. She didn't really want that dolly. All she wanted was a special picture of Grandpa in a beautiful red box. Well, Mom tried to explain that it was kind of last minute, and she said, well, just ask Santa for it, And Mom had lots of wonderful pictures of Grandfather, but it was like 10, 11 o'clock on Christmas Eve. Where was she going to find a very special, beautiful red box? Well, she looked all through her cabinets of boxes and wrapping paper, couldn't find anything. The girl had gotten tearful when it sounded like she might not get it and had gone to bed. And finally, Mother didn't know what to do. She was just sitting at the kitchen table, and she was looking, and there was my present. And she thought, well, I'll just to take her mind off things, she said, I'll just open it and see what I got from Carl. So she opened it, and she was thrilled that she got this wonderful hand-painted glass ornament that I'd given her to add to her tree. But she was even more excited when she found it was encased in a very beautiful, special red box. And she put the picture of Grandfather in that and hung it from the tree. And the girl found it in the morning. And one year, I had a girl who was getting near the age where kids stop coming, unless they have younger brothers or sisters. She was about 11 or 12. And we had a pretty nice visit, but we got to the end, and I could tell there was something going on, but I wasn't sure what it was. And I noticed that her father had been talking to the photographer the whole time that we'd been visiting. And then they left, and the father had come over and shook my hand and said thanks, and they left. And then the photographer came over to me, and he said that what Dad had been telling him is that they had come last year, and despite my best efforts, and except for special cases and situations and people who have come for several years, it's real hard for me to remember sometimes from year to year. And he said the previous year they had come, and the girl had been plagued with some kind of horrible chronic illness that had real debilitating symptoms. And they had tried all kinds of different treatments for 3 years, and nothing would make her symptoms go away. And the previous year, she had asked me as Santa to take her symptoms away. And I had explained, like I do, that that wasn't something I could make happen, but I would make that my Christmas wish for her as well. And then when she was leaving, apparently, I don't think it was me, I think it was Santa said, and I'll bring you something really special this year. And on the way home in the car, she explained to her parents what had happened, and she took that to mean that, in fact, Santa was going to take her symptoms away. Well, 2 weeks after Christmas, her symptoms went into remission, and they'd been in remission the entire year. And whether that's the power of faith, belief, hope, positive thinking, whatever you want to call it, or maybe just her guardian angel talking to mine or mine talking to hers. There are a lot of things like that that happen that are just too good not to be true, so to speak. Santa is all about hope, and that's why, again, I think the tradition has lasted as long as it has and is so jealously protected, and which is, fortunately now we have a number system at North Park, but before we did, people would stand in line 4 or 5 hours at a time to have their child have a visit with Santa. And it's about hope, the hope that my sister and I had that we were going to catch a glimpse of the reindeer one year when we ran to the door, the hope of the people who gathered for the solstice celebrations in the sort of the bleakest of times, starting to sound like today a little bit sometimes, and that there would be a positive outcome, that the sun would return. the hope that Santa will bring a teddy bear, a Barbie doll, or what have you. Maybe the hope that a young woman she just slipped me a note one year as Santa. She wasn't going to wait and sit on my knee or anything, but she was in her late 20s, and her note was very simple. It said, Santa, somebody broke my heart this year. Can you bring me a new one? Again, a hope for healing. One more. I got to tell you one more adult story, maybe two actually, and then stop me. Because adults do come to see Santa, and I think because he serves the same function. I had one year there was an article about my work as Santa in the paper, and it sort of talked about my background in psychology and what have you. And Charles, who worked with me for years, and unfortunately passed away a few years ago, as sort of managing the set, and he and I had developed over the years almost a psychic connection. We could communicate with one another when something was going on. He asked me if when it was time for my break I could wait for a few minutes and do one more set of pictures. I said, okay. He said there was a woman there, an adult woman in her mid-30s, who wanted some pictures taken. Matter of fact, she wanted a lot of pictures taken, and she didn't want to wait in line, with the kids. And I said, well, okay, if we can do it, at the end of the set or whatever. So she came up. She had on this long trench coat. When she took it off for the pictures, she had on this beautiful evening gown. And I could tell, I've worked a lot in psych hospitals and with alcohol and drug abuse folks, and I could tell she'd been living a pretty hard life. And she sat on my knee, and as we were taking all these pictures, she explained to me why she wanted these pictures and why she'd come to see me. She'd read about me in the paper, and she said that she had been... she'd had AIDS for some time now, and that she'd just been diagnosed with leukemia, and she wanted a good set of pictures of her looking, as good as she could to send home to her family who lived on the East Coast somewhere, who I think she was estranged from, so they would have something, positive to remember her by. So we took a great set of pictures, and as we were talking, she was trembling like a rabbit, scared rabbit. And when we were done, or as we were getting done, I went ahead and asked her. I said, "Well, what do you want? This year?" She says, "I want to come back next year and take another set of pictures." Well, the year goes by, and we're about halfway through the season, and all of a sudden Charles just yells out at me, "Santa, look who's here!" And I looked out, and there she was. She was thinner, she was paler, but she was waiting in line this time with the kids, and she waited her turn and came up, and we took another set of pictures for her to send home to her family, and that was the last year that I saw her. And then one final story, and I swear this is the final. I was, a young man came by in the middle of the afternoon. It was early in the season, so it wasn't too busy yet. And he asked he said, "I want to do something special, and I want to know if you'll help me." I said, "Okay." He says, "Tonight, my girlfriend and I are going to be the last in line. I'll make sure we're at the last in line. And when we get up to have our picture taken," he says, "I know what she's going to ask for Christmas. She's going to ask for an engagement ring, and I want you to give her this." And he hands me this jewelry box, and I open it up. Beautiful little diamond, not very big, but beautiful. And I looked at him, and I said, "Are you sure?" And what I meant was, "Are you sure you want to leave this with me?" And he took it to mean, "Am I sure he wanted to ask her to marry him?" And he said, yeah, I am. I said, "Okay, all right." And I took the ring. He was very, very young, very enthusiastic. And I put it in the drawer of the little table next to me. And So later that evening, indeed, I saw them. They were the last in line. They had a friend there to take some pictures. And, and they come up, and when it's time for the picture, she sits on my knee, and he sits on the arm of the chair, which is often how young couples have their pictures taken together with me. And so we take some pictures, and I ask her, I say, well, what is it you want for Christmas? And she says, oh, I want an engagement ring. I want a diamond ring, you know. Well, Santa's a bit of a joker, so I don't go for it right away. And we start talking about other things and taking some more pictures, and he's starting to sweat a lot, you know, sitting there on the arm of the chair, and finally I couldn't do it to him any longer. I said, now what was that first thing you asked for? She said, oh, I want an engagement ring. And so I reached into the drawer and pulled out the box and opened it. I said, oh, you mean something like this? And I handed it to her. He jumps off the arm of the chair, runs in front, and he grabs her in her hands, and he looks at her and says, will you marry me, you know? And she goes, yes, 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 you know. And they start hugging and kissing and bouncing up and down the whole time she's still on my knee, you know. And finally, the other folks there, the other folks working on the set, you know, just convinced them to give Santa a break, you know. And the next year, I saw them standing on the edge of the set, and I recognized them because that is something you don't forget, you know. And so when I had a chance, I went over to talk to them, and they said they just wanted to thank me for being a part of that very special moment in their lives. And then they went on and said, and we also wanted to let you know we've calmed down a lot, you know. So I said, that's okay, that happens. And that was actually one of, I've had 5 couples actually get engaged in my lap. And I think there's very few people who can say that, you know.